أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أئنا لمبعوثون أو آباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Brothers and sisters, respected Shaykh Usama, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And on behalf of the Light of Guidance, we welcome everybody, inshallah, for another lecture in the series called Reclaiming the Narrative, the lecture series on Islamic beliefs. Before we continue any further, I would just like to extend my condolences to you all and to the entire Ummah on the death anniversary of the great Imam Khomeini, rahmatullahi alayh. Inshallah, if we can request from everybody to please recite Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Ikhlas on the soul of Imam Khomeini and on the souls of all of the ulama and shuhada who gave their lives for the movement that Imam Khomeini began. Inshallah, ba'd salati ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inshallah, to begin the program, we'll welcome our brother Hassan Fakhruddin to recite from the Holy Quran. If you can help me welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah, I'll be reciting from Surah Al-Ankabut, page 396, verses 1 through 18. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. ولقد فتنا الذين من قبلهم فليعلمن الله الذين صدقوا وليعلمن الكاذبين. أم حسب الذين يعملون السيئات أن يسبقونا ساء ما يحكمون. من كان يرجو لقاء الله فإن أجل الله لآت. وهو السميع العليم. ومن جاهد فإنما يجاهد لنفسه إن الله لغني عن العالمين. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لنكفرن عنهم سيئاتهم ولنجزينهم أحسن الذي كانوا يعملون. ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حسنا وإن جاهداك لتشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما إلي مرجعكم فأنبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لندخلنهم في الصالحين. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله فإذا أوذي في الله جعل فتنة الناس كعذاب الله ولئن جاء نصر من ربك ليقولن إنا كنا معكم أوليس الله بأعلم بما في صدور العالمين. وليعلمن الله الذين آمنوا وليعلمن المنافقين. وقال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا اتبعوا سبيلنا ولنحمل خطاياكم وما هم بحاملين من خطاياهم من شيء إنهم لكاذبون. وليحملن أثقالهم وأثقالا مع أثقالهم وليسألن يوم القيامة عما كانوا يفترون. ولقد أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه فلبث فيهم 1000 سنة إلا 50 عاما فأخذهم الطوفان وهم ظالمون. فأنجيناه وأصحاب السفينة وجعلناها آية للعالمين. وإبراهيم إذ قال لقومه اعبدوا الله واتقوه ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. إنما تعبدون من دون الله أوثانا وتخلقون إفكا إن الذين تعبدون من دون الله لا يملكون لكم رزقا فابتغوا عند الله الرزق واعبدوه واشكروا له إليه ترجعون. وإن تكذبوا فقد كذب من قبلكم وما على الرسول إلا البلاغ المبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم.
همون ساعاتی که ما اونجا ساعات سختی رو میگذروندیم از ساعت 3 و 4 بعد از ظهر تا ساعت 10 و 20 دقیقه که اون حادثه تلخ اتفاق افتاد، این چند ساعت خیلی بر ما سخت گذشت، خیلی قابل تصویر نیست. در همین ساعات آقای حاج احمد آقا فرزند عزیز حضرت امام یه چیزی رو گفتن پیش از ظهری امام رو تخت شروع کردن نماز خوندن، هی نماز خوندن. ایشون میگفتن نمیدونم نافله میخوندن، چی میخوندن. مدتی نماز خوندن، بعد پرسیدن که ظهر شده، گفتیم بعد. اونا شروع کردن حالا نماز ظهر رو خوندن با نوافلش. نماز ظهر عصرشون رو خوندن، بعد شروع کردن به ذکر گفتن. ایشون گفتن که تا اون لحظه‌ای که امام این حالت عارضه براشون پیدا شد و در حالت کما رفتن، مرتب پشت سر هم میگفتن سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا اله الا الله والله اکبر، سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا اله الا الله، تا آخرین لحظه ایشون ذکر خدا رو. این درس برامون، ما که رهبرمون رو دوست داریم، یعنی این کارهای او رو، این روحیات او رو باید ادامه بدیم.
تمام مقاصد انبیا برگشتش به یک کلمه است، با اون معرفت الله. تمام مقدمه این است.
حقیقتاً برادران عزیز، این فصل 10 ساله تاریخ ما یک فصل تکرار نشدنی است.
خدمت عموم ملت شریف و شجاع ایران اعلی الله کلمتهم.
فصل عجیبی بود این 10 سالی که بر ما گذشت.
عواطف ملت ایران به دوش من باری گرانی است.
نمیدونم اونو چجوری گذروندیم، لحظات اون رو چجوری با وجودمون لمس کردیم، با او چگونه برخورد کردیم.
من به پشتیبانی این ملت دولت تعیین میکنم.
درست 10 سال و چند ماه به اندازه طول اقامت رسول خدا در مدینه بعد از هجرت، 10 سال و چند ماه.
به شما آقایان که در رأس بعضی از کشورهای اسلامی هستید نصیحت کنم.
چقدر شبیه به هم حوادث اتفاق میفته. درست مثل همین جا، یادتونه اون روز تاریخی رو که وقتی اتومبیل حامل امام عبور میکرد از این خیابانها، زن، مرد موانع رو در مینوردیدن، خودشون رو میرسوندن تا چهره رهبر عزیزشون رو ببینن. در میان دنیایی که معنویت‌ها و ارزش‌های اخلاقی افول کرده بود، دنیای مادی به ماده و جسم بدل شده بود، امام معنویت رو در این دنیا زنده کرد، مثل یک چهره معنوی درخشید.
و من می‌خواستم که به ایشون بگم که شما هدایت کنید خودتون را و جمعیتتون را به اون عالم تا این عالم هم اصلاح بشه.
حالا که صادق هستیم، اگر می‌خواهیم امام زنده بمانه، باید راه امام رو زنده نگه داریم.
این انقلاب باید زنده بماند. بکشید ما را، ملت ما بیدارتر می شود.
درس امام باید زنده بمونه. هدفهای او بایستی هدفهای حقیقی و اصلی به حساب بیاد. عشق ما به تو، محبت ما به تو، ارادت ما به تو، ادعای شاگردی ما نسبت به تو در این صورت صادق خواهد بود. نگذاریم این بار روی زمین بمونه. بارها ایشون میفرمود، همه شنفتن که ما کار رو برای نتیجه نمی کنیم، کار رو برای تکلیف می کنیم.
شما آقایون موظفید که تکالیف خودتون عمل بکنید و مستقیم و مستقر در کارتون باشید و احساس وحشت از هیچ چیز نکنید.
اون کسی که برای تکلیفش کار میکنه، پیروزی او به اینه که موفق بشه به تکلیفش عمل کنه. پیروزی او به این نیست که به مقصودش دست پیدا کنه. به راه بادیه رفتن به از نشستن باطل که گر مراد نجویم به قدر وسع بکوشم.
عالم پر از ظلم است. ما بتونیم جلو ظلم را بگیریم باید بگیریم تکلیفمون است. قرآن و ضرورت اسلام و قرآن تکلیف ما کرده است که ما باید بریم همه کار را بکنیم.
Inshallah, before we welcome our dear teacher, Shaykh Usama Abdulghani, just one more of the statements of the leader, Imam Khomeini, Hafidhahullah. He said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, we were truly dead, and the Imam gave us life. And we were misguided, and the Imam guided us. And we were heedless of the great responsibilities of the Muslim human being, and so the Imam woke us up and he guided us to the straight path in such a way that he took our hands and he encouraged us along the path, and he was the front runner of that path. Inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give all of us the tawfiq to be true followers of Imam Khomeini, because as Shaykh Shirazi said, that is the only way that we could ever be true followers of Imam Mahdi Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Inshallah, with that, we welcome our teacher, Shaykh Usama Abdulghani, with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's good. I think it's good, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين، روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So I hope everybody's doing well. Inshallah, today we are going to be commemorating the death anniversary of Imam Khomeini, a very, very important event. I would also like to share a little bit about what is called the uprising on the 15th of Khordad. You see, Imam Khomeini referred to this event as the start of the revolution. Why would he say that? What happened on the 15th of Khordad that was so important? Inshallah, I'll talk a little bit about that. So these events we're celebrating or commemorating actually a little late. So Sunday would have been the death anniversary of the Imam himself, and then Monday would have been the 15th of Khordad. But remembering these days is very important. After that, then of course we'll continue with our original lesson. So for those of you who are following along in the book, then now we will be getting to, meaning if we're able to tonight, come to the, the lesson called The Outcomes of Understanding Tawheed. So it's the second lesson on Tawheed in the book. We'll see how much of it we're able to cover, inshallah, tonight. Remember, brothers and sisters, when we're covering that section on Tawheed, this for us is the second take of the leader on this all-important concept. But we also remember that for him, it's not a concept. It's not mental acrobatics. Rather, what he's trying to teach us and show us, and what we're trying to gain for ourselves, is the practical responsibilities that come with being a muwahhid. If someone is a muwahhid, what must this person do? So we're looking for our responsibilities. That's why it's such a good idea for brothers and sisters, even before we go over the lesson, to read the lesson, to ponder the ayat of the Quran. I'm going to slow down so that we can look at the ayat of the Quran together, because you and I, we don't want to forget what we're actually looking for. What we're hoping to do by pondering these ayat of the Quran, by reading ahead, by pondering collectively, by asking questions from the Quran, is that you and I are trying to arrive at a lofty spiritual gift that Allah has promised the mu'mineen. Brothers and sisters, if you don't mind, can you turn with me to Surah number 8? Let's see if I've quoted this one correctly. Surah number 8, and then verse number 29. Let's see if we'll read it together and see if I've quoted it correctly. So 8:29. Do you guys see this? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu in tattaqullah. Y'all see that? Okay. Let's look at that together. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So, O you who believe, in tattaqullah, if you have true taqwa, if you're God-wary, then God promises something. يَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ فُرْقَانًا. God will grant you the furqan. You'll be able to decipher between haqq and batil. You'll know what to do. It's a gift that Allah grants those who are believers and have taqwa. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm saying this first of all for myself, but also for you guys. Later on, when we start to look at some of the questions we're going to ask ourselves today, and then what we see ahead towards the coming of the Imam, and knowing the idea that we're going to be tested by our current wali as we prepare for that wali who's ghaib, we're going to need this furqan. We're going to need the furqan. So we're trying to work together to think, to ponder, in order, inshallah, to arrive at that conclusion. Now, before I start to mention a few words about Imam Khomeini, and for those of you who have studied some of his history, you may remember that they used to refer to Imam Khomeini as the idol breaker, But Shikan. Imam Khomeini, brothers and sisters, it's hard for us to describe or hard for us to gather just what an incredible individual this man was, what he did for Islam and the Ummah. And we're discovering more now. But who this man was, what he did, it's something that literally we all have to kind of in our own pace, make sure that we're studying, we're learning, we're sharing, right, with others. We're contemporaries. I mean, we're living in the same era, at least, of Imam Khomeini, but it's important that we kind of share these things. But before I mention anything about Imam Khomeini, I'd like to start off with asking some pointed questions. Questions that will have very real conclusions. But my request from brothers and sisters is that before I provide solutions and answers to these questions, and I'll partially answer the questions, that brothers and sisters ponder the questions themselves. The reason is that you and I also have a clarification jihad. We have a responsibility not only to understand Islam, but then to clarify what Islam is, to make sure we take the right stances, but also to make sure others understand, because this is a battle for the hearts and minds, why they should also take the right stances. So these questions are very important, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit of a brief fashion. So the first question is this. Is it really, this is important, is it really an Islamic necessity for us to remember Imam Khomeini? Is it really a need? Or is it something that, alhamdulillah, it's good, right? But symbolism, is symbolism important? Is having the picture of Imam Khomeini important? is remembering the various events that took place in the revolution. We're talking about the 15th, the Qiyam of the 15th of Khordad. Is it important to know? Is it an Islamic responsibility? Or is it something where we said, let bygones be bygones? I mean, it's question now. Is it a necessity? Is it taklif? Or is it kind of going over the top? Not really a need. So again, brothers and sisters, you think about that before I try to answer this. Now, what happens, brothers and sisters, is, and I'm going to just walk a little bit because I like to walk when I'm actually delivering the lecture. I'll stop. Inshallah, we'll come to the verses of the Quran. But first, as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So again, brothers and sisters, we're asking that question. Is it a real need? Is it a responsibility for us to mention Imam Khomeini this much? We're here in America. Do we have to? Is it a need? Okay. Before I answer, because I'm going to start giving some historical examples, but I'll say this. The Shimmers and Yazids of today hope that the answer to this question is that, it's just kind of over the top. It's good and all, but it's not necessary. That's what the Shimmers and Yazids are hoping for. You see, the Shimmers and Yazids, they're like the Shimmers and Yazids of that time. We talked about this before. Brothers and sisters, Shimr, Yazid, Ubaidullah, they were hoping that Karbala would be a small, bloody massacre. They would kill Abu Abdullah, it would be tragic, but it would be buried in the sands of Karbala. Not mentioned, not in detail, not repeated. They were hoping that we clean it up, we go back about our business, and we all kind of forget about it. Who stopped that from happening? Imam Sajjad and Sayyidah Zainab and that brave caravan. They simply refused to allow Karbala to be something that happened in history, was very good, sad for instance, and it just went its own way. They wouldn't allow that. They kept explaining in details. What happened? When did it happen? Why did it happen? Who did the Imam go against? Who was right? Who was wrong? Second question. But okay, Karbala, yeah. But someone or something, an event that's so important, so clear. We're talking about Imam Khomeini now. This happened in front of all of us. Alhamdulillah, there's books, there's literature, right? We're not talking about something that happened 1400 years ago. Question, could something this clear, this important, could people have a wrong take on it? Could they not know? I mean, alhamdulillah, it's here. We know what happened. It's great. Brothers and sisters, something more incredible than the Qiyam of Imam Khomeini took place. I want to give you a story from one of our senior ulama, one of our greats. The great that I'm referring you to, brothers and sisters, is Ayatollah al-Uzma, Shaykh Murtaza al-Ansari, our marja, way back in the day. This marja was standing, it was Ashura, and our marja was standing in front of the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And the processions were going by, and the processions, people were, you've seen what it's like, people beating themselves, processions. One of our Sunni brothers was standing there next to the Grand Ayatollah. So he asked the Grand Ayatollah, he said, I just wonder why you guys make this such a big deal. He was like, we all agree, all Muslims, we agree that Imam Hussein was a very good man. We agree that he was martyred, he was shaheed, he was madloom. Yazid was terrible. We agree with that. We all agree on that. But we still see you guys marching in these kind of processions, coming out, making such a big deal. Why? Something was that clear. So the Ayatollah answered him. He said, it's actually a problem, a mistake that we did. He said Ghadir took place, something more tremendous than the revolution of Imam Khomeini. The Prophet of God, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, was standing in front of 100,000 people. He raised the hand of Ali. He said, Man kuntum out. And the people, they think that, it's just not that big a deal. Ali, Imam, the Prophet, that happened in history, but you know what the Prophet was trying to say? The Prophet was trying to say, be friends with Ali. So you see, the problem was us though. We didn't make Ghadir as big a deal as it should have been, and then this happened. Now people literally think, well, everybody should be friends with Ali. He said, but the problem is us. So what happens is we learned that lesson. We said, okay, well now for Muharram, if we don't make it a big deal, if we don't explain, if we don't have these processions, somebody might walk later on and say, Imam Hussein he was a good guy, but he made a mistake. Yazid had taqwa. He went up against the government. So, brothers and sisters, I hope we're able to take away the big picture lesson from that story. Even an event that's very clear. People can do tahrif. It can be misinterpreted. Imam Khomeini, even now, could be reinvented in the minds of some. It's important for you and I to know him. What did he do? Why did he do it? What happened? Who was he? What was Islam like before? What is Islam like now? Where are we going? These things are very, very important. Salawat, please. So our third question now. The third question, brothers and sisters, is this. What is the view of the Ahlul Bayt when it comes to history? We're going to start going over some ahadith now. What approach do we find? I'm going to mention the ahadith that the Ahlul Bayt want us to take when it comes to history. One lesson. We learn from history, and I'm going to mention the hadith, that events, or you could say, history repeats itself. Personalities change. People change, right? But the principles are pretty much the same. Hadith now from Amir al-Mu'mineen. He tells us this. He says, Istadil ala ma lam yakun bima qad kan. Predict what's going to happen in the future based on the past. There are patterns. The Imam says, فَإِنَّ الْأُمُورِ أَشْبَاهُ. History repeats itself. There's patterns out there. You and I, we want to find out, well, what's right, what's wrong, what's the stance, who now, the line of Ali, so that we don't fall into traps. Because you see, the second lesson, the first one was the idea that history repeats itself. The second hadith that I want to share with brothers and sisters is this. We want to learn lessons from history. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of those who were in the past. This is now again from Amir al-Mu'mineen. So the second point we learn from the hadith is this. Man lam yatta'idh bin nas. That person who doesn't learn lessons from others. I read history, but I don't see a lesson that I have to take in this. I don't see maw'idah that I need from this story. He says the person who doesn't learn those lessons from history, what happens to that person? The Imam says, وَعَظَ اللَّهُ النَّاسِ بِهِ. The person who doesn't learn the lesson, God will use that person to teach other people lessons. If history is just, well, I'm just reading it, but I'm not taking those real lessons, practical stances. God will use me and you, and other people will come back in history and they're like, oh yeah, well here's another group that failed. The other one, the third point that we're going to learn from history is this. Brothers and sisters, what separates the men from the boys, I'm going to give you a historical example. So after that we have to learn, why is it that we need to cover this stuff in detail? What separates the men from the boys, brothers and sisters, is your stances and taking the right stance at the right time. Not just knowing history. What is the stance that if I was there in the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, what would my stance have been? Am I taking that stance now? We have to understand the moment and then act on the taklif. This is why we need that furqan. What's the taklif right now? And then I have to act on it right now. Example. This is now, I'm going to mention a hadith that probably many of you have memorized. But I have a question for you, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters, was the ikhlas, the sincerity of Amir al-Mu'mineen, was it any different from one year to the other? The ikhlas. Amir al-Mu'mineen was always sincere, correct? Right? Always sincere. Always fighting for Allah. Greater than all of the anbiya. Was his ikhlas different or was always the same? One nur is ma'soom. But you know what the Prophet says? He says, La dharbatu aliyin yawm al-khandaq afdalu min ibadati al-thaqalayn. Ali was always the same. But on the day of Khandaq, when the enemy came over the trench, and it's now all of Islam versus all of Kufr, the person who took up the flag of Islam, the sword, to go over and take on the enemy was Ali. Ali was always the same. He was fighting in every battle. He was our standard bearer. But the day of Khandaq was different. Islam was in danger. The Muslims have been intimidated. Ali broke kufr with that strike. So, the big picture lesson, the idea that the moment, Yawmul Khandaq, that, my time right now, what's needed, what God wants, the time is important. The stance is important. Another example, this is now from history. There's one of the stories that you and I hear in Muharram. It's the story of a woman named Tawa. Who's Tawa? So the story is the story of Muslim. But let's not forget the point though. We're looking for stances. The right stance at the right time. Muslim Ibn Aqil presented a big challenge for all of the believers. A big test. He came to Kufa. Hani bin Urwa was arrested by the authorities. Muslim came to liberate him. We've heard the story. I don't want to get into all the details. Muslim decided, the tribe tried to liberate him at first. The tribe failed their test. They were foolish. They were naive. After that, Muslim said, now is the time. We're going to go over. We're going to liberate Hani. Muslim marched on the castle. When Muslim marched on the castle, he had 4,000 people with him. 4,000 people. Ubaidullah had 50 retainers. Let's say 100. The books say 50. Let's say 100. Surrounded the castle. Muslim shouting, we're ready to go. A commander like Muslim. And Ubaidullah did something that Tawheed do. Ubaidullah started to wage psychological warfare on the Muslims. Ubaidullah was using his people and they were effective. They told the people, they said the army of Sham, the army of Yazid will come, they will rip you apart, the army of Sham. One way of terrorizing the people. The other one, finances. They told the people, they said that, you know, when you fight Ubaidullah, what's going to happen? You and your children, your stipend, from the Baytul Mal, from the public treasury, that stipend's going to be cut off. Your income, your livelihood. They told the Muslims. They said that Ubaydullah is so merciless. Ubaydullah is going to punish the innocent for the guilty. And it worked. The people of Kufa got scared. It's mentioned. The women came and they started to take their relatives. Literally, they said by their hands, "You get back over here, boy. Yazid's army's coming. They will tear us all apart." Family members, everybody going and talking to one another and convincing one another, there's no need to be out here. By the time the day was over, that army of 4,000 people had become 30 at Maghrib. By the time Muslim finished Isha, Muslim is wandering in the streets of Kufa by himself with battle gear. Stances though, brothers and sisters, stances. So, in the entire Kufa, nobody's going to pass the test of protecting Muslim. But again, what will we do? History repeats itself. So Muslim is wandering in the streets of Kufa, full battle gear, and Muslim comes looking through a house, and he comes to the house, and there's a woman standing outside her house. Her name is Taw'a. Taw'a is standing outside her house, and Taw'a is, what will we do though? I'm going to talk about what Ubaydullah was doing. Taw'a is standing outside her house, waiting for her son Bilal. Bilal come back in the evening. Muslim comes to her house, and then he stops there. He asks her, he passes salams, wa alaikum assalam, "Can I have some water?" So goes in the house, she gets him some water. He finishes that water. She goes in the house, after she's finished, puts her cup back. He's still there. So then Taw'a told him, she was like, "You can get up on out of here." Muslim didn't say anything. She said, "You had water, right?" "Yeah." "Leave." Muslim didn't say anything. 3 times, Muslim's not saying anything. She told Muslim in the end, she was like, "Look, you're non-mahram. You're standing outside my house. I'm never going to forgive you. Leave." The Muslim opened up. He said that, "I don't have anywhere to go." He said, "I've been invited here and I've been abandoned." She said, "Who are you?" Because he had asked her, he said, "Do you want to get some ajr? Maybe I can repay you one day." She said, what do you need from me?" He said, "that I don't have a place to stay." Everybody failed. Taw'a said, because he introduced himself, he said, "I'm Muslim." She said, "You're Muslim?" So Taw'a knew what she was getting into. Ubaydullah, just for context, Ubaydullah has spies all over the city. There's a price on Muslims' head. Whoever protects Muslims gets what's coming to Muslim. Her husband is one of the henchmen of Ubaydullah. Not like an ideological family. Taw'a sees the opportunity. Taw'a tells him, "Come inside the house." And she served. She put a rug down for him, bringing food. She's in the house. Her son Bilal comes home. And he sees his mother is not normal. She keeps going to a certain room in the house. Sometimes she's crying. So then he says, "Well, what happened?" And his mother, he kept insisting, kept asking, till finally she was like, "Muslims here." She said, "Swear to Allah you're not going to tell anybody." And Bilal swore to Allah. But see, what was happening at the same time was Ubaydullah, when everybody abandoned, Ubaydullah came to the masjid. This is Isha prayers, right? This whole thing takes place in 24 hours, less than 24 hours. Some people become victorious, some people fail. Ubaydullah made salat in the masjid, and he said, "Tell everybody to come here and make Salatul Isha with me. If anybody doesn't make Salatul Isha, you're outside of Islam. The protection of Islam doesn't cover you anymore. Your wife, your wealth, your money, and your nafs, you yourself will be halal for me." The masjid was full. And he explained. He said, "Yeah, that Muslim, he messed around. He did all these wrong things. Whoever provides shelter to Muslim will get exactly whatever is going to happen to Muslim. He said, but if you turn him in, there's a lot of money. And Bilal turned him in. That day, the next morning, when Muslim woke up, Tawa came, she brought him some water for wudu. He made wudu. He had been praying almost the whole night. She thought he had been praying the whole night. He said, no, actually I fell asleep and I woke, in my dream I saw Amirul Mu'mineen. And he told me that you're going to join us soon. He said, I'm going to become a shaheed. He said, but the good news, your stance, he said, you have secured the shafa of Rasulullah. So stances, we're not just repeating history for history's sake. We're learning those, history repeats itself. There are patterns. So now, brothers and sisters, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happened on the 15th of Khordad. Why did Imam Khomeini say that that was the beginning of the revolution? What happened then? So, brothers and sisters, just for context, our grand Ayatollah, Ayatollah Burjurdi, he died in 1961. The grand Ayatollah, we had one marja, right? The Shah was afraid of him. He wasn't able to do all the things that he wanted to because he was afraid. One marja, he has authority. He died. Marja'iyya, after that, is going to come now and be split up among several individuals. It wasn't like Imam Khomeini is the only marja. Marja'iyya, part of it had also went to Iraq. We had other grand ulama over there. So, in the minds of the system of the Shah, Islam is now a little weaker. Before there was a centralized authority, you couldn't do everything you want. Now we sense weakness on behalf of the Muslims. So then, under the orders of those who were the real kingmakers, the Shah started to do some reforms. These reforms were going to pave the way for Israel to get control over Iran and to wipe Islam out. So as an example, still even now, because the Shah was afraid, they waited until they had a parliament over there, like a Congress, but it was just obey the order of the Shah. Even then they were scared of that. They waited till the parliament wasn't in session, and then they approved this new bill. Part of the new bill, for context, part of the new bill was going to say that those who were going to take positions of authority didn't have to be Muslim. They could Muslim meant being like the Shah. He said, no, not even that kind of a Muslim. You don't have to be a Muslim, and you don't have to give an oath on the Quran. What did they have planned? Allahu A'lam. Imam Khomeini realized this. And Imam Khomeini gathered the ulama, and this still wasn't the 15th of Khordad. He gathered the ulama, and they protested, and they insisted, and they pushed back. And Imam Khomeini was so vocal, and those other ulama, they break so much heat for the Shah, that the Shah was forced to take it back. Imam Khomeini said, don't take it back privately. We're going to do this open. You're going to announce. And they did. So this was a small victory for the believers, the beginning of the movement. But the Shah had other orders. Kennedy said, he said, I want you to push what they were later going to call the White Revolution. The White Revolution was going to be a way for the long-term interests and the short-term interests of the empire to be able to take place. They said, we're passing this. Imam Khomeini protested. This time he gathered more ulama. No, we're not going to do this. This is against Islam itself. But the Shah wouldn't back down. You see, people like the Shah, they can be replaced. He said, if I don't do this, I will be destroyed. The Shah insisted, and the Imam pushed back. He was going to do this and also do a referendum. He pushed and insisted. The Imam protested after this. Then what happened was that he was able to get it through with force. But Imam Khomeini is still fighting back and pushing back. So Imam Khomeini announced that this year we don't have Eid. It's going to be a public day of mourning. Imam Khomeini is writing some letters to those guys. They just have no idea who they're dealing with this with Imam Khomeini. More than that, the Shah was so furious that he came to Qom. He gave a fiery speech, and then the goons of the Shah came in to a majlis was being held where Ayatollah al-Uzma Abdulghani was also there. And the goons of the Shah attacked. They started beating the students, unarmed students, Hausa students. They started throwing them off the walls of Faydiyya. Right? So the Shah showed you, if you mess with the Shah, this is what's going to happen. But you see, Imam Khomeini, they had no idea who they're dealing with. Imam Khomeini said, I have already prepared my heart for your bayonets. And Imam Khomeini continued his struggle. Imam Khomeini is resisting. There's a lot of things I'm missing now, up until now. What Imam Khomeini decided to do? I'm going to give you your answer in Muharram. You see, Imam Khomeini had a very deep belief in Muharram. So Imam Khomeini sent messages out to all of the ulama, the senior ulama, and he prepared his students going all over Iran. He said that what we're going to do is on the 7th of Muharram, you're going to tell the masses what happened in Faydiyya. And they did. And the results were incredible. But then Imam Khomeini himself said, wait till Ashura. Imam Khomeini came and he spoke. And brothers and sisters, if you knew what it was like at that time, that speech of the bravery of Imam Khomeini, after he spoke and he connected all the dots, Israel, the Shah, Islam is in danger, the regime said that's too much. They waited for a couple of days after this, and then the regime stormed the house of Imam Khomeini. The regime came to the house of Imam Khomeini. Imam Khomeini at that time was sleeping next door in his son's house. They sent a SWAT team, commandos, came over the wall, kicked in the door. They started beating the two believers who were inside the house, who were there to protect Imam Khomeini. They thought he had armed guards, just regular people there. They started beating them. Imam Khomeini heard the commotion. He said, the authorities are here. And then he came out. And Imam Khomeini said, I am Ruhullah Khomeini. What are you doing? When the SWAT team saw that righteous anger of the Marja, Imam Khomeini, they got scared. They said, no, we're not going to beat anybody. Respectfully, but they took Imam Khomeini, they imprisoned Imam Khomeini, put him in the taxi or the car, and they whisked him out. They were running. They were getting out of there before anything happened. They had to get him to Tehran. To the extent Imam Khomeini was like, let me make salat. The time they let Imam Khomeini stop was for tayammum. They were so afraid, whisking Imam Khomeini over there. The next morning, this is why it was so important. The next morning, the people heard. The people of Qom heard what had happened, and the people came out because Imam Khomeini's son went out. Instead of getting intimidated, he came out. They went to the haram, speeches, everybody upset, and the people came out saying, either death or Khomeini. And the Shah decided to punch them in the mouth. Machine guns. The people weren't intimidated. They opened fire with machine. They brought a tank in Qom. Fighter jets were flying over Qom. 2 hours later, the news of what happened in Qom came to Tehran. They started rising up. Other places, simple people, regular people, they put on their kafans, their burial shrouds. Whatever little tiny bits of money they had, they put it aside. They said, make our wasiyah. Who knows what's going to happen? And they came out, and the Shah punched them and hurt them. You can only, the machine guns, the fire, right? But the pressure was so much and the uprising was so great, and it continued, ulama, till finally Imam Khomeini was released. They released him. So that's just a little part of the history. That's the beginning of the thing. Inshallah, Allah help us to pass our test when they happen. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, brothers and sisters. Now we're back to those ayat of the Quran. So that chapter, the outcomes of Tawheed. And what is that lesson that the leader is trying to teach us by showing us these ayat of Tawheed? The leader explains in the beginning of the lesson that many of those who have rejected religion, rejected God, have not done so because, for instance, they disproved God, that God doesn't exist. Rather, what happens is, in all honesty, many of those who've come up with other forms of governing have seen that organized religion is incapable of running the world's affairs. So these people have they see that there are problems in the world, there's oppression in this world, there's so many terrible things, but deen, in their minds, can't help fight back against this. Deen can't. The problem is that those who are accusing deen of being incapable are people who haven't been exposed to Islam. Organized religion means the Judeo-Christian experience. Organized religion means other world religions, not what Islam says. So when we see those who say that I cannot accept religion or deen because it's incapable of running the world's affairs, then we explain to them, which deen? It's not Islam, because otherwise the religion of Allah, we're going to go to our ayat of the Quran now. Brothers and sisters, can you turn with me, see if I've quoted this one correctly. Surah number 57 and verse number 25. What we're going to do now is to find what deen is, the goals of deen are, and then after that be able to say that, well, if you see these problems, it's not deen. So let's see, am I quoting this correctly? Brothers and sisters, if you have 57:25, do you see this? لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. Y'all see that? Okay, let's read this together. God says about religion, He says, definitely we sent Rusulana, our messengers, right? So this isn't Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of the Rusul, all of the prophets, Isa, Musa, Nuh, every prophet, deen, he says, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلُنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ. We sent them with clear evidence and clear proof. So somebody else, if they're coming to us from another religion and they're seeing that sometimes the Trinity doesn't make common sense, science conflicts with religion. I can't be worshiping Jesus as God when Jesus is praying to God. If they see those things, that's not Islam. Why? Because the verse told us that Allah sent all of His messengers with clear evidence. You have intellectual conviction if you have embraced Islam. Bil bayinat. What else? God also says this. He says, وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابِ وَالْمِيزَانِ. He also says, and we sent down with them, we sent down with them the book and the mizan, the scale, right? So Islam has beliefs and also ideology, a practical way of dealing with the world's problems. What was the goal of all of this? Again, the ayat of the Quran. So that God says, why was this all happening? This prophet's clear evidence, the book, the scale, all of this. لِيَقُومَ النَّاسِ بِالْقِسْطِ. So that people, the masses, would rise up for justice. So, for those who say that we find that religion is unable to stand up to the zalimeen, many times religion is working with the oppressors, then that's not Islam, that's not, right? We also tell them, if you find such a religion, then reject it on our behalf, because that's not Islam, that's not deen. The Quran mentions, and let's see if I can quote this verse correctly as well. So other people are frustrated by seeing religious leaders cooperate with zalimeen. You will have presidents who are war criminals meet with the Pope. And people see that religion isn't standing. There's so much oppression going on. How murderous is Israel, as an example? What happened to the Rohingya Muslims? What happens to the prisons? The prison systems here, you couldn't put an animal, a dog, and treat it the way that some human beings are being treated. So if they're seeing that, then the Quran tells us, yes, it's true. Some religious leaders are working with the zalimeen. we told you what Islam was. We're going to go to another verse of the Quran. Let's see if I quoted this verse of the Quran correctly. So this verse, brothers and sisters, is Surah 9. Surah 9 and verse number 34. 9:34. Let's see if I've quoted this one correctly. Brothers and sisters, do you see with 9:34, do you see this? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu inna kathiran. Do you guys see that? Correct? Okay, good. O you who believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, inna, truly, kathiran min al-ahbar wa ruhban, many of the rabbis and monks, لَيَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ, they consume the wealth of the people bil-batil, through falsehood. What else? وَيَصُدُّونَهُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, the religious institution that was supposed to be bringing people closer to God is standing in the way, barring people from the path of Allah. So yes, those individuals, that kind of deen, that's not Islam, that's not our religion, that's not the message of the prophets. Yes, we also agree. That kind of religion, we also reject it. Now the next question, which now we're just going to be able to ask, and then later on, inshallah, be able to answer. How important is this concept of Tawheed? How important is this concept of Tawheed? Is this just an answer to my intellectual curiosity? Or is this going to change everything? You see, some questions are just let's say somebody asks you, brothers and sisters, how heavy is the earth? How heavy? There's an answer to it, but what difference does it make? What does that do for you? If it's this many pounds, right? But there's some questions that when you ask them, everything changes. The leader gives one example, and we're going to stop with there. He says that, let's say you were racing off in some particular direction. You were supposed to be going, let's say, from here to Ann Arbor. Right? You were racing from here to Ann Arbor. And then the person who's sitting with you in the car is like, are we even going in the right direction, or are we moving in the opposite direction? That's a question that, at the very least, once that question is asked, you have to stop. Well, are we following the GPS, or are we going in the opposite direction? That's different from a situation where it's just intellectual curiosity. And so what we're going to do, when we take the correct take on the concept of Tawheed, it's going to be one that is, again, a game changer for all of us. But we'll end now, brothers and sisters, we'll end with salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you, Shaykhna. Thank you, Shaykhna Ma'jur, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you, inshallah, to all the brothers and sisters for coming out, and to everybody who was following online. Inshallah, next Friday and the Friday after that, we will continue to have our same program, the same lecture series covering Islamic beliefs from the book Reclaiming the Narrative. But with that, we thank everybody for coming out, and if we can request for everybody one more time to send a salawat to the soul of Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة. إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء